First off, Scott, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I've seen you on video. I've seen you on podcasts. And
Okay.
podcasts have become the new. I don't know how many podcasts there is right now. There was like 5 years ago. Was there 5 podcasts about firefighting? Oh, now there's
And now
literally
everybody
has podcasts. Now I don't use a podcast. I've used as my ability to get to talk to people about firefighting. And at the same time, if someone else want to listen, like that's nice to get an idea. So I don't know if
fantastic,
which I think most podcasts are trying to do. Like, why not just, it's sort of like making it more efficient. Having a public conversation.
I love having the conversations and just talking fire. It's great platform to do it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the conversational format is I think it's good. Because it allows you to, I mean, talking is one of the best ways of thinking. I do, like everyone else, my plate is full. And thinking is not really something you set aside time to do. So, let's say, I'm doing a Swedish course on fire behavior, an online course, and it's very hard to find time to think. And I've been shooting a lot with Ed Hardin about technical things, and then just instead of trying to think, to set up a conversation with Ed, for instance, about technical things. That is time well spent on just thinking with someone else.
Kind of getting in the zone and get a little deeper level and focus and concentrate. Yeah.
It's I mean, to get to that level by yourself, it's very hard.
It is.
It is much easier to
get distracted easily.
Oh yeah, it is. And you have, and if you schedule a meeting with someone else, you also have a deadline. Like you have to be here right now. There's a slot in the calendar, and like maybe there's a purpose. Like right now, I don't really have a purpose.
Agenda. Yeah, just talk. Just let it go where it goes, right?
But in this case, I didn't have a very clear agenda, but I have a rough thing, because I heard you talk on podcasts, and for one thing, you thought you weren't afraid to speak your mind, which I think is very important. Otherwise,
good days and bad days, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, as a fire chief or as a senior officer, sometimes people become, and understandably, but they become reserved, because you're of course you're the figurehead of an organization. There's sort of like an expectation on how a senior officer or fire chief should behave. There's this image, and again, for better or worse, it makes people reserved, and they really want to speak their mind, because it has consequences, of course.
But you're exactly right. But then we need those, Lars, those people that go out there and got to push that a little bit. I think in our country, the firefighters are dying for that. That they're just dying for that leadership to come out and say it's okay to do this, and it's okay to be into this. And we just don't have enough of that. It's and I don't know why chiefs, they're afraid, kind of what you say, they don't want to put themselves out there and face the criticism. But if you're going to do those things, you're going to have enemies. You're going to have people that have an opposite view. That's not always bad. It just depends how they express it, right? But differing opinions are very healthy, as long as there's respect.
Do you think it's? I don't like the word fear, simply because nobody likes to be afraid. I don't think they. So if I think about a typical fire, because it's the same in Sweden, so it's the same culture. Like it happens the same way. You can see a person that's fairly open-minded and outspoken, and they climb the ranks and they become this bureaucrat. At least when you talk to them in public. In private, they might be a little bit more open, but in private, to use a different word, saying that they're trying so hard to become professional, and they're trying too hard not to screw up. And sure, that's being afraid, right? Like you're trying not to screw up. You want to do a good job, and that forces you into that category. Like I'm trying to be professional, and I try not to screw up, and that sort of becomes that framework for not having the guts to say what you like. Because I agree. I mean, like authenticity, like this feeling that your boss is a real human being, that like decisions are hard, that there's an ups and downside, and like, you know, I think that's vital. Like everything they like, the authenticity is hard currency. Like, because it's so tied to trustworthiness.
It's huge in trust, and but to truly be authentic, you got to understand yourself a little bit, right? And you got to kind of commit to a position, a philosophy, principles, right? To truly be authentic, and there's some self-discovery, and then either having the courage to go out there and be vulnerable, right, and open that up to the world. That's kind of where I mean by the fear is, once you put yourself out there, people start judging, and they put you in a class or a category, right, wrong, or otherwise. That's what happens, right?
Yeah.
But that's part of leadership. That's a big part of leadership, I believe. I
didn't picture myself as a, and I at some level I don't do, because I was a firefighter, and I was a battalion chief. In Sweden, it is different, but still the same to go up in ranks. It's not seniority based. It's a merit based system. But I was never. I didn't in battalion chief in Sweden. I only ran calls with multiple stations, but I didn't deal with people on a daily basis, because
really
it's Sweden is different from station to station, either from department to department. But typically, a lot of times in Sweden, if you go back 20 years ago, it was that battalion chiefs ran their battalion on shift, and also on calls, but also off calls,
right?
But maybe it's the introduction of the managerial side of the fire service, that you were the captains, or the equivalent of the captains in Sweden, ran their stations now, and they're work leaders. They're the boss of the that, and they might have sort of like you might call a production leader, like on a facility. There's a production leader that works 8 to 17, and they tell them what their station should do during the days and so on. And the captains run that. And the battalion chiefs are sort of like, I was in charge of training. So I was in charge of training, and I went on calls, I ran stations. But besides that, I have zero things to do with the shifts.
That's the perfect job, my friend. If you get to go to fires and do training and don't have to deal with personnel issues, you found it.
Yeah, well, but it had other issues we could go into, which I didn't understand then. But me and my fire chief had the same opinion. I shouldn't work with people.
Well, what I would give to just go to calls.
Yeah. Well, that was, in that case, in that sense, it was nice. That was the norm. So that's how battalion chiefs are run. So it wasn't that, but it was also I was a criteria of mine. I don't want to deal with people because I don't have the patience. So again, I didn't because you need a lot of patience to deal with people. But point being that I didn't ever consider myself a leader in that sense, and it took a long time before I understood that. I mean, because I'm going back to where I really want to talk about it as an instructor, because I early started instructing in different topics, and then it was swallowed by just firefighting. That was the only thing I did, and then I started traveling internationally, and it was a very long time before I realized that it's sort of the same thing, because I'm trying to make things happen. Like if as an instructor, if I don't try to change things, I don't know why I'm there. Like I could, as an instructor, like uphold the status quo if everything is perfect. But usually that's not the case. I'm there because I have sort of something I believe in. I think that some sort of knowledge is important. I think that certain action is important, and I try to change that. And of course, that is the huge part of being a leader. You want to influence the organization or the people in some direction.
Yep.
And again, it took me a long time to realize that I had to learn about leadership also, or lack of a better word, being the evil word is being a manipulator. The nice word is being an influencer, or we call it whatever. Like, like, how do I influence people to go in a certain direction? How do I? I don't know if the definition is manipulation if I have evil intent.
Well, that's interesting. That I think that's one of the big. And there's a couple things that I talk about in my program, and I'll say this is manipulative leadership.
Yeah.
Right. I think sometimes it is. You could probably have a discussion that leadership to a large degree is, but it's certainly an influence, right? If you're a positive influence, you're practicing good leadership. If you're a negative influence, you're probably not a great leader, but there's a certain amount of it. If you're truly saying to get people to do things, right, then there is a certain amount of motivation or manipulation or
well,
whatever you want to call it.
If you have if I with my 5-year-old son, if I try to make him do something and it's for his own good, and I use all the tricks in my book to try to make him do something. I mean, that's manipulation, but it's with good intent. Like, it's for his own good. And in that case, like, I would define it as influencing. I'm trying to positively influence him to be. Yeah, but it is. I mean, it's just maybe it's the difference is just intent. So the tricks and tools of manipulation, like that, those are very interesting and very vital to start to study. And if I just want to start with asking a very broad question about, like, when you think about change, like when you think about I want to change something, it could be culture, it could be a topic, could be a simple things like a host load, like the technical thing. Like, where do you start to think about it? Because everything you're going to change, there's going to be some resistance. Where do you start to think about, like, the key pieces of how I want to make this happen?
So I have a whiteboard in my office, and at the top of the whiteboard, it's permanently affixed. It said, "Start with the end in mind, and why? If not this, what?" So I think a lot of mistakes that fire service leaders make is they don't know what the end result looks like. They say, "Okay, I want to change this," and they kind of learn as they go. Now that's okay, but there's a smaller margin for adjustment and correction. So the way and we've done some big changes. We implemented a paramedic only program, which is very unusual in our part of the state. We went to a strict engine company and truck company deployment model. So those are huge changes. And the way that I went about it is you really got to do the work on the front end, because you want to sell, you don't want to tell. So the more questions that I can answer, and the more able that I am to sit down with a small group at a firehouse, a shift, a battalion, and explain what the long game looks like, number one, why we're doing it, but most importantly, how this influences you. Let me get on the personal level and talk about how this affects you as a firefighter, as a company officer, as a shift commander, and then explain that why, but then follow it up as, if we don't do this, what are our other options? And so I look at change as transition. I'm very pro change. I'm not afraid of it. I think we have to have it to grow. But I think if we can address all those things, do the homework so we can explain what success looks like, articulate it so that every level of the organization understands it, explain the why, and then kind of say, if not this, what? That's where you get a little bit of your ownership. Okay, Cap or Chief, I'm sensing that maybe you're not on board, or there's a little bit of resistance here. Let's talk about what our options are. We have to change, right? If you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not changing, you're not staying. So let's talk about what some of those other things are. And I think when you have that conversation, you find points where you start moving in the same direction, and those are the things you capitalize on. That's your momentum, if you will, for change.
In Sweden, there's like a mantra you hear all the time. I read on LinkedIn. I see fire service leaders is constantly say that the fire service is conservative in the sense that, you know, like firefighters don't like to change, like the firefighters are different and so on. Do you think that's true? Do you think that the fire service is more different than any other job that's out there?
No,
in that sense,
I don't know if the expression's made it over there right. Two things that firefighters hate: the way things are and change. Right. and
well, I've seen the meme, but I don't know if the meme is popular in Sweden. But
it is. No, I think I think the environment. You know, the fire service is very unique in the fact that you know, we're type A personalities, but with fire stations we have an organizational culture, and then we have subcultures, and then we even have microcultures, right? So if you declare down to the smallest level. And so I think the opportunity is there just for a lot more time to talk about change and be influenced by a lot of other thoughts and opinions and personal values. And so, yeah, I do think change is more difficult in the fire service. Now, I also believe it's kind of based on the maturity of the organization. Some of the research I did for the book, you know, I found out that the more mature, the older organizations with several generations that have come up through the ranks resist change much more than like we have areas where we're growing so quickly that they really don't have a true identity. Then change is easier. But I think it's all about the approach of how you take it. And the other thing is that the organization has to trust that if the change is not good, or if you're not achieving the desired outcome, that the leadership is not going to be afraid to say, hey, we made a mistake. Let's rethink this. We're not sticking with a bad plan. And so I think if the organization has that trust or that belief that if it doesn't work, we'll look at it, then they're going to be a little bit more receptive when you come up the next time with an idea or a plan.
If I look at when I hear that, I look at the sort of like, if I look at a plumber, like how much change has a plumber seen in the 20 years? Well, there's been, you know, technical changes and everything. Is there big culture changes? Probably not. They're plumbing away. And
yeah,
and if there's a new thing, like I guess, like, you know, like that, you have to convince the worker to use a different type of method or whatever it might be, because, you know, change is hard in the sense they have to change their techniques, and that involves learning, and learning is a chore. Like, it's boring for most people and so on. But at the end of the day, they don't really care, probably, like, because they're not married to a certain technique, and you know, like, you know, hopefully they want to do a good job. But I mean, that's you know, it's not life and death.
Also, well, that's what I was just going to say. I think there's a welfare or a safety aspect in there where that's the gold standard, right? How is this going to impact possibly my survival or my welfare? And that's certainly a component of it.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody told me that, yeah, I want to use this technique, and if I didn't care, and if I still thought I was safe, I would just go like, fine, like, whatever you want to do, as long as you're paying me, you know, go ahead.
Right.
But if someone tells me I want to use this technique, and I go like, yeah, I don't think that's safe, or I don't think I'm going to be as effective, and I do care about my job, like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, I don't know if the stories about, like, fire department in New York when the SCBAs came and they still had their cheaters on because because it was a culture thing, and of course also they thought they'd make them better firefighters because they could make their air last longer. Like, you know, fuck you, I'm going to be a badass firefighter, and I know, you know, like, your safety culture is not going to, you know, like come in the way of me being a badass firefighter.
Right. You're gonna slow me down, and you're gonna make me less than what I want to be.
Yeah. And sometimes when I hear the discussion, I go like, yeah, but you shouldn't be that upset if you feel that the fire service is conservative, because people care. Like, it's based sort of on a good thing. Like, it's based on people actually caring. And if you want to make changes, you have to make them really understand that it's because it will make you better as a fire service. It will make you better as an organization, and so on. And if you're failing with sort of like a message, maybe the message is maybe it's not the recipient that's the problem. It's the sender. You're not being clear in your message.
And I think that's the problem much of the time, that the work hasn't been put in on the front end to make that message as clear as possible, and to where, like I say, every level of the organization has got to understand it, right? If they're going to be impacted by it. How does it affect me?
So is there a point where you just go, fuck it, I'm going to run with this, and if you're not on board, leave the ship?
Yes and no. You know, I think you got to do what's good for the majority of the organization. I always look at that. Yeah, some things I think you just have to get. Now, I haven't been faced with that very often in my current position, but I think you got to look at the majority or the organization. And if it's going to do, you know, if it's good for 75%, 25% is not buying in, then you got to say it. I can't think of a decision that I've had to make that really the whole organization was resistant to, where I just said, fuck it, this is what we're going to do. I'm sure they're probably out there. One doesn't come to mind. That's an interesting question, though.
No, well, it is, because at some point, maybe it's I mean, if you haven't considered this before, like where do you draw the line at some point trying to make a change? Like you said, it might be that you backpedal and say, we made a mistake. This change wasn't good. I mean, like, the resistance we're getting is not worth it. And the resistance we're getting is because maybe it was a bad idea to start with, like that. But it's not worth it. We're going to backpedal. But on the other hand, you go like, okay, so if we're not backpedaling, we still think this is a good one. At some point, you go like, no, we've put as much work into making this happen. And if somebody's not on board, like.
So when I first got to the colony, you know, we're small. We're 4 stations getting ready to build a 5th. And I was very committed to this engine company and truck company deployment model. And I could spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but truck guys ride the truck, engine guys run the engine, and did that out of building confidence and performance and taking advantage of our fires and gaining experience. And I would say I probably had quite a few initially said, oh, that's big city stuff. You know, they do that in FDNY, it'll never work here. And then there were probably just a lot who didn't even know what that looked like. It was like speaking a foreign language. And that was one of those where I just kind of said, well, we're going to do this. Trust me. And we'll give you the tools. We'll give you the training. But after fire started going well and they saw the dividends that paid, then it starts selling itself. But I know I had some hardcore guys that were really against it. And I'm not sure there's anything that I really could have done on the front end to convince them. They were just set in their ways. And that group, I just had to say, well, we're going in this direction. You know, based on where you are in this organization, I expect you to do all that you can to make it a success.
Yeah. So that is an interesting topic we could talk about, because in Sweden, it's remind me to get back there, talk about the truck company.
Yeah.
But I want to stick with change a little bit more. So, because it is, as an instructor, I mean, I personally, right now, I travel and instruct, and I have the sweetest job in the world. I go around talking to fire nerds about fire, and I just try to give them as much information and tools as possible, depending on, you know, what type it is. And then I'm out of here. Like, I have zero responsibility for making it happen. When I, you know, as a training chief or at an organization, I'm also a part-time firefighter, but yeah, like bottom rank, no responsibility, just ride the engine, part-time. It's you know, it's very sweet. But again, so I don't on a daily basis, I'm not faced with making, I don't implement things anymore. But I am supposed to give them the tools they need to implement it. So I'm sort of, in that regard, in that specific sense, I am not talking to them as someone going through the same thing, because I don't implement things in a regular basis. So I constantly, how I handle that is I constantly talk to people. And of course, I constantly talk to the ones who are going in my classes. Is that, have you tried this? Have you tried this? And that's the way I get experience from trying to implement new things a lot of times.
Right.
That's sort of, I try to make the best out of it. But when I have these conversations, you have these certain things that always come up. like you always have this instructor saying that, well, we're trying to make this happen. We have limited amount of time. So how do you balance? You talked about the why and the how. So let's say they want to change a technical thing or a department. They know they're just going to have limited time. It's 2 hours or 4 hours, and whatever it is always too little. There's never enough. And they say, look, it's how do we spend that time? How do you manage that time? And like how do you? Is there a generic way of saying that? Like how do you balance the why? Because if you only teach the why about a certain things, they're gonna they're gonna fail on the fire ground because there's a lot of how involved. But again, you have to make the switch. Like how do you think about that? Is there you have to teach the why until you think they bought into it, and then you can switch to the how?
No, I think that's part of our job as instructors, right? To make the training session, the process more efficient. That's kind of why we are there. And I think by picking out the must know and nice to know, I think in my approach, when I teach, I tie them both together. I think we start off with the why. This is why we're going to train on this, and maybe we even talk about the fact that we're not going to have sufficient time, but this is the point that we need to get to. I'm a huge believer in standards, as much as we can have them for that reason. Once we have established standards, and a standard's either based on time or finish, was it done correctly? And so when I think you can get it down to that level, the target becomes a little clearer. And so we can maximize that time, talk about why we're doing it, where we want to get to, and then put in the sets and reps to get there with a coach right there to immediately give feedback, right? Hey, okay, that was good. Now try this. Let's do it again. Or we got to back up a little bit. But the reason why I think the why is so important is once you understand the why, you become a problem solver. Then you're empowering each person to kind of work through challenges that they might encounter while doing that skill or technique. So I kind of think that's part of the teaching process, is to figure out just what you're talking about, that blend of performance and the mental understanding of what it's supposed to look like. If it's not right here, it's not going to be right here, right? We agree on that. If it's not right in the head, it's not going to be right at the hands. So we've got to work on both of those things to get the final product done, the performance.
Explain to me you talked about what success looks like. Explain to me that.
Well, if you think about it, and I've asked this questions hundreds of times, but if I'm a boss on an engine, I should be able to articulate what my book is called The Functional Fire Company, and functional means it's designed to perform something, serve a purpose, and operates to. So what does engine company success look like? What does truck company success look like? So I've asked that questions to fire chiefs. You're the chief of department. What does success look like? And I took a lot of time answering that. So if you were to come up to Scott Thompson and say, hey, what does success in the Colony Fire Department look like? Well, I've got it down to a definition. We're going to be prepared mentally, physically, mechanically, procedurally to do 4 things: take care of people, them and us, solve problems using all available resources, manage risks inside, outside the firehouse, and maximize our operational capabilities. So in 30 seconds, I was able to start forming a picture of what success looks like in the Colony Fire Department organization. But if I'm an engine boss, or I'm a truck boss, I'm a battalion chief, and I don't really know what success looks like, then what am I doing every day? I'm kind of going in and we're just dodging, landmines, putting out spot fires. And I don't know if we are able to progress and get better. We're just kind of always in a maintain mode. And I think that's a bad position to stay in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. I want to break it down more, but you talked about standards. Standards is part of trying to make that mental and picture about what success looks like.
Right. So if we say, our standard for deploying an 1 3/4 hose to the threshold of the Division 1 threshold, okay, and we define the parameters of how we're going to do that. We put a time to that. And let's say it's 2 minutes, okay. So we can define success, if we talk about kinks and leaks, and we're not going to walk over those and the technique. then we've defined success for that evolution. We can do it for throwing a ladder, and the more we put those together, right, the more we start to develop that picture. And the important thing is if I understand what success looks like, I can then see when we're deviating from it, and that becomes now a life safety issue. So I always challenge my students to, let's start off there and let's talk about what success looks like, so we have something to work towards. And it may be a standard, it may be a principle in some cases. Some things we can't always get down to I like to take things to the most finite level if I can, break things down and then build them up, so to understand them better. And that's exactly what we're kind of talking about, whether it's a performance, starting at the technique level, the task level, tactics, or strategy. We should be able to perform success in each of those realms of thought, I believe.
So if you're a fire chief and you say,
right,
let's say you have a standard for, like you say, you have a standard for how success looks like on an organizational level, like the high flying goals. There's a lot of fancy words, and you can fill those fancy words up with anything you like. That sound every department has their own fancy words. If you leave up
right,
them or not, I don't know. That's a whole different ball game. But like, you say you want to break things down to like the smallest individual piece to build them up again and to understand them. Like how far do you think you have to go as a fire chief? Like if we're talking about a hose bed, like where do you stop your commitment to details about what success looks like, and how much do you empower your employees, in that case, your whatever it might be, to decide you just whatever hose bed you like, run with it. As long as
you do. So that's why I kind of said, my biggest priority is preparedness, being ready before we go out the door. And so there's a mental component, the mind's right, a physical component, the body, the mechanical preparedness, that's our stuff. And then the procedural is the playbook, right? And so that's the most important thing in our day. And I also often say, you call somebody in a colony fire department, ask them what's the most important thing. It's to be prepared in those 4 areas. And then to do those things, to take care of people, solve problems, manage risks. Now, that's broad. So that's as far as I go.
Yeah.
I leave it up to the company officers in the firehouses riding the fire trucks to maximize that. Okay, so we combine that with our mission: save lives, protect property, solve problems, manage chaos, and initiate the recovery process. I don't like the big words. So I'm kind of saying what I want the end result to look like, but how we get there is up to the men and women that are riding the rigs. Now, another thing I think in the fire service that I'm concerned about is I think we got to be more alike than we are separate. And this ties into success. One of the things that I'm concerned about with social media, I'm sure it's the same where you are as it is here. If somebody has a fire, the whole fire world is going to chime in on how they did. That was great, or you guys suck, right? Well, if you have an organization with anything more than 2 stations, there's a chance that survivability could become philosophical instead of situational. In other words, if the values of that company officer on preparing that crew, rather through training or whatever it is, differs greatly from another one, now I may have a better chance surviving in Engine 1's district than I do in Engine 2. And it's not going to be the smoke and fire that kills me. It's going to be the philosophy or the principles of what I think are important. Are we going to do vertical vent? Are we going to do event enter search? Whatever terms you want to use. That's an unjustifiable position as a fire chief. Yeah. So I want to create some uniformity. I want to say that my system, the fire department, is going to deliver a basic level of service, no matter who's on duty or whose fire district you live in. And I believe we owe that to our citizens. And I fear that with social media, we're going to start seeing that separation of hey, I'm in this system and it's not consistent of how my problem is going to be handled.
So this is a bunch of questions.
And disagree with me.
Yeah. No. Well, if I do, I mean, first I just want to ask questions because I need to understand and I want to get your feel about what you think about things. But But so where do you, how do you know where to do it? So let's say you create a standard operation guideline or standard operating procedure and say so on. How do you know how detailed that those should be? Like you said, if you give someone and say, the standard operation guideline says don't be an asshole, do a good job. Like I said, beyond that, figure it out.
Okay, great question. I'm going to use that, but I'm going to use for fire operations.
Yeah.
So we have what we call a fire operating guideline. And it's objective based, right? So it's a TASKS acronym: tactical objectives, assignment objectives, knowledge, SMART, goes on right down the line. So if we go to a fire, we either meet the objective or we don't. If we don't meet the objective, we got two choices. We either train differently or we modify the objective, right? So it's down to the simplest form. In our system, everybody has a job, everybody has an assignment, and I trust the battalion chiefs to put the people in the right position to perform, put the best team on the field. Then we go out the door, we exercise that fire operation guideline, and we either meet the objective or we don't. We come back, we talk about it, and we say, are we training correctly? We can fix that if we're not, or do we need to modify this objective because it just doesn't fit the scene? So I believe that's taking it down to the most basic level, but still it's up to that engine company and truck company to perform at the task level to get those things done. I mean, we're not talking about how the hose beds are set up. We're talking about the performance of the system, the fire department.
I talked to Tim Sundelbach the other day, and I asked sort of the same question on that, and he said, and I thought it was really good, and said if your guidelines or procedures, whatever it might be, when you evaluate the incident and you see that people are making judgments to leave the guideline, they're doing something else because it didn't fit the situation, your guidelines are probably too narrow and too descriptive. And if your guidelines, if you end up, most of the time following the guidelines and people don't want to deviate from them because they feel they're efficient, they're doing a good job, then you might be sort of on the right level of being descriptive enough to get uniformity, but not descriptive enough to make people into robots and feel that they're limited. Is that an okay answer?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that makes perfect sense. If they're deviating more than they're conforming, obviously there's a problem. But I think in our system, the key is we use the word address. So depending on where you are and what you're riding, it's your job to address fire attack, ventilation, search. Yeah. We're not telling you how to do it. We just know that this person is going to address this problem. Now, we follow that very closely, obviously, and we don't see a lot of deviation from our guideline. And now, we also have a key term is if the first in engine company sees that there's something out of play, they get on the radio and say, hey, engine 11, we're calling an audible. And that tells everybody that the guideline's going out the window, and now we're going to go to manual, right? Now we're going to have to be more of a you do this, you do that type of thing. But what I don't understand, it's like any other activity, whether it's athletics or whatever, is you got to have a common approach, or every fire is like your first one, right? You're never gaining experience exercising the system. You're always going at it. It's like the first time. And I think that's a huge problem. It's the colony is the sixth fire department that I've worked for. So I've seen 5 previous, very well-respected, very progressive fire departments. A lot of it as a working firefighter officer where I just didn't have enough structure really to help me do the things that I needed to do. Rather, it was a big fancy mission statement that we didn't understand. So I think those are little things that we can provide the line boss to help them be more effective. It's like, how do you teach aggression, right? If you don't have some parameters, if you don't have a box to work in, that's a very tough thing to define. Yet we tell our guys to be more aggressive or less aggressive. Well, we need to do a better job of helping them make sense of that.
Is it more understandable that, I mean, if you look at a department like New York or something that's like has a lot of staffing and units arriving, simultaneously or multiple in a short amount of time. Right. If you don't have pre-planned assignments, like that's gonna be a mess. because the incident commander is going to be bogged down and just, trying to identify, okay, what's the current need, and trying to assign units. It will be, it's understandably a very slow system. But if you only have one unit, let's say you only have one, you're a rural station, you're 10 minutes away from reinforcement, that, you have 5 guys or whatever it might be, and work with. Is it more understandable to have pre-assignment tasks at individual level, at unit level, or is it the same thing, would you say?
No, it's certainly based on the system, but we all have to address the same things, right? So rather we're going out the door to a fire, whether it's 1 engine or 15 engines, right? Somebody's always got to address fire attack. That's part of what we do. We got to address water supply. We got to address search. We got to address ventilation, exposure protection. So the more resources you have, the more things you can get done simultaneously. I always say the incident commander or the company officer with fewer resources has a much more difficult job, because they got to read the incident and prioritize, right? And use what they have. Now, I think we've all come to an agreement, no matter what side of the world we're on, that water wins. Getting water on the fire is
usually a good idea.
Right. So that's a starting point, right? Yeah. So if I'm showing up with a small group, then let's get really good at putting water on the fire. Unless I have people in the front yard that I'm stepping over, let's work on getting the fire put out, right? And so I just think we don't want to eliminate critical thinking. We want problem solvers, but I think there's a huge gap between that and not giving any. If I'm waiting for the battalion chief on every fire, you do this, you do that, you do this. That's a very inefficient system, in my opinion. There's somewhere between that and robots that I think we need to focus on.
So to give some context, the Swedish Fire Service we don't do EMS. So Swedish Fire Service on the bat has way less firefighters, because the hospitals run EMS. So we do sort of, it's called in waiting for ambulance, basically. If someone has a serious event like a cardiac arrest, we go out and do CPR and defibrillators and stuff like that. So anything serious, we go out and but we're sort of the if you can't get a real doctor, you'll get a second-hand doctor, just because they're more
doing something.
Yeah, we're doing something. So, but again, that makes the downside of that system, and the switch was, I don't know, 25 years ago. Was it? Yeah, probably 25 years ago. Because 25 years ago, the fire service was at least part of running the ambulances. That's a whole different. But at least the result was we have way fewer firefighters, and usually per capita and so on, than, for instance, America, which benefits from, depending on where you are in America, it's a lot of differences, but usually benefits on having EMS, because you have more staff at fires. In conjunction with that, we started, instead of going with a big fire truck and 5 people, we started to get, the forces were starting to get distributed on multiple vehicles, for instance. And for instance, where I live as a part-time firefighter, I have a small, basically a personal vehicle, but it's got blue lights on it, and it's got, portable fire extinguisher. And I have that at my house when I'm an officer at part-time, and I go straight to the scene. But the firefighters go to the fire station, pick up the fire truck, and go to the scene. So the different people can arrive at different units. And let's say at your full-time station, go back in the day, they were always together as a group, because if the engine went to buy coffee or went to do a fire check on a automatic fire alarm or something, everybody went, because they had to be a unit. And that's not the norm anymore. 2 firefighters go there with 1 vehicle, and 1 firefighter goes there. So you're spreading out people, just basically to get more stuff done when there's not a fire call. That's sort of the main one. And also to if you have multiple vehicles going around, someone is going to get there faster, even though it's just 1 firefighter or maybe 2. But again, when those 2 things hit the fire service, the standard operating procedures started to go out the window, because they were all based on being sort of a 5 people. In Sweden, it's 5 people to do, basically spin the building block of an engine, or doing a fire attack, because that's what you need to go inside. And that went out of the window. And with that, it became too hard to pre-plan, because now you can have one firefighter with a truck arriving, or you can have one officer with a personal vehicle arriving, and they have different tools, different possibilities, and so the standard operating procedures went away. And there was also philosophy change. It happened before I started. I learned about these things afterwards, sort of secondhandly. So it's also, of course, my interpretation of history, which is very important to say. Someone else would say it's different, but there was a philosophy shift that said, hey, firefighters are robots. We want to make them more into dynamic problem solvers. Using the words you said, and we sort of the same words we use in Sweden. And it was framed as a good thing. We want to be dynamic. We want to be problem solvers. We want to use the limited resources we had as efficient as possible. It sounds great. And pre-planning assignments and pre-planning tasks was the opposite of that. That was robotic. That was part of it. And my experience was that exactly as you said, that we had a problem with consistency, meaning that how can I work together with other people if I don't know what they're going to do? that requires a lot of micromanaging for officers to get things done. But the other thing, I would say it was naive to the point of madness to think that firefighters could handle that amount of choices. It was not until I realized that I was a poor fire officer until I really started changing. Because when I became a fire nerd, when I started learning more about fires, I realized there was so many options you could take. There was so many things you could consider, like just fire behavior. You could stand and watch a fire behavior on a building all day and never do anything, because you're just analysis paralysis. It just changes. You go, oh, the color here changes. Well, what could that be? Maybe. Right. and I realized I'm not a good firefighter because I don't have the mental capacity to process all this information, and I'm making poor decisions. So I need to pre-plan my decisions more. That was my personal realization, because that was not taught into me as philosophy in the Swedish fire service. It would be, no, you should be dynamic. You should form your checklist in your head when you're at the scene. This is the most important things to do. So we're getting there, and I have a philosophy battle in Sweden to fight that, because when I say to firefighters in the nicest words I can, which is not "you're too stupid to be dynamic," it's too cognitively challenged to process all that information when you're there. So we need to pre-plan decisions more, because if I'm not very careful, they will hear, oh, you want to make me into a worse firefighter, where you want to make me into a robot, but I'm a dynamic professional superhero. Why do you want to make me worse, Scott?
But think about it goes back to, let's back up. Probably nobody could argue that as officers, we have to maximize the stuff that's given to us, right? And firefighting is local. I've got to look at the city of the colony and what we're going to deal with. We have something called a Fox box. It's a very small home, very cheaply built. And that's what's driving our system. We don't have time. If we're going to have any window of opportunity to save somebody in that Fox box, we got to get to work right away. And so we really focused on how do we minimize that zero impact period, the time from when we set the brake till we start doing firemanship, right? And we want that very small. So I think options are good, but I agree with you. We can't give you so many options that you can't process them in the front yard. And I think we can do that very efficiently. We can give these options to consider. And then let's pick one of those. The expression has become, it's another tool in the toolbox. Well, to me, that's a cop-out sometimes. It just means I don't want to have discussion about it right now. But that toolbox is getting awful big, right? And so we got to ask ourselves, do we want to be really, really good? Do we want to be craftsmen at using a few tools at a very high level? Or do we just want to be hack or a hobbyist where we can make it work. And I've chosen the other way. We also have to look at how often we get to exercise it. We don't go to a ton of fires. So we want to practice something so that we get better, right? We want to grow on our last experience. And I think that all plays into it. So I would say to you is that we're not taking away your ability to problem solve. First of all, you're part of a team. So we have to have that team dynamic where we're working towards one thing. The other thing is I want you to be a very high performer at the things that you're going to be doing in your wheelhouse. So let's focus on performance, getting really good at applying at the technique and the task level. And to do that, I mean, a quarterback of a football team, I know your football's different than ours, right? But
yeah, we play football with the foot.
With the foot, right. But I always love to use those analogies, right? There's a strategy there, how you approach it. And when a quarterback goes back to pass, he's got several options, right? He's got his dump, but they give him that.
I'm nodding here and saying, yeah, I know that, I understand.
But I relate to that. So we got to give. We don't want to tell them exactly what to do, but I say we got to define the box. Anything you do in here is acceptable. When you get outside the box, that deviation, I think, is where we come into problems. But again, I'm going to go back to saying I think we got to be more alike than we are different. And the only way I know to get there is through standards and having some of those pre-arrival understandings that I'm going to worry about this while you're worrying about that. And we're going to come together to get this thing under control. So I don't see, we've been doing this for 10 years now, and I don't see any lack of decision-making or initiative with a very choreographed system. I just don't see it. That's not saying it couldn't happen. I saw much more of that when we didn't even have a plan of people just basically freelancing and doing whatever they thought needed to get done.
Yeah, and I in my context, in my world, and in Sweden, you would be the outlier because that's not the norm. And I don't know,
I'm the outlier here too.
But do you feel? Me. Yeah, but I mean, when I look at America, if you look at just this part, like pre-assignments, as I would see, I've never gone to an American fire service, but they didn't have a pre-assignments in that sense, more than Sweden at least. So it has to be that your norm in America is more focused on having a playbook. But it's a lot of differences over America, would you say? Yes. I mean, I would, I don't know what you've exposed to, but in my travels around here, it's the exception to the rule. Most of the fire, most of the ones I come in contact with, they look for all the reasons why they can't do it instead of trying to research reasons to do it, And another example I would use, we could say that in the airline industry, every flight is different. The age of the aircraft, the experience of the pilot, the weather. Yet they're a very checklist-driven industry, right? You pull out and I would like to think that the person flying my plane is a problem solver, right? Because they go in the simulator and they throw a bunch of scenarios at them and they make them problem solve. Yet they're a very checklist-driven industry. So I think you can have both. I don't think it's either or. I think it's finding that combination to where you give your people enough to go to work, and then on the things that deviate from the day to day, if you will, the bread and butter, we'll be able to solve that problem with these choices. But they're limited. I don't think we can have a never-ending list of choices, because then you're going to go into overload. So how do you spend too much time analyzing? So do you have a mental framework for how to decide, like, how many options should I give people? Like, how do I believe in 3 to 5. 3 to 5 options is managed. And I think there's some science. I can't quote it right now, but I've done a lot of research on performance. And I think 3 to 5 options are within the brain's ability to process that in the 45 to 60 seconds that we have to do that. That makes sense. And I remember the case for communism, limited choices. Well, it is. It's not a good argument in that sense for communism, but it's still an argument. But I remember I read a human behavior study where they looked at doctors and they looked at what treatments they gave patients and so on. And it was based on this study was, like how did they deal with choices, and that also came to the same, because I read a lot, came to the same conclusions as you said, like 3 to 5 choices, because when they increased the amount of choices, and it wasn't even 3, it was like when they went from 1 to 2, basically 1 to 2 choices and up to 3, the amount of people that's just defaulted back to the default option was just staggering, meaning you didn't really make a decision. You just went with whatever was pre-assigned. Like it could be a form. Like one of the example was like, do you want to donate your organs after you die? And that seems like a very sort of, at least on the level, this search like the sort of important question. Like, do you want to be cut up after I die? Right. And the study found that whatever you said on the form, it said check this box if you don't want to donate your organs, or if you don't check a box, you will donate. Oh, sorry, I messed it up. But anyway, whatever. Like if I had to make a choice to donate my organs, there was a very few amount of people that wanted to donate their organs. But if the pre-choice was let me know if you don't want to donate. Right. A huge amount of people want to donate their organs. Like, so that's a very important decision. It's made up just by the person writing the form. Like that's that. And again,
but that's how our mind works, right? And that's how we think. And I think there's a lot to be said. Everything that we said we use that word address, but everybody has a default responsibility. So it cuts down on our talk on the radio. It just says this is what success looks like. We can deviate from that, and there's no repercussions for doing that, but let's kind of talk about what it should look like. Let's exercise that, and then we'll talk about the options off of that. And we could sit there and consider options all day long, but firefighters got to start fighting fire at some point, right? We at some point it's got to go from analysis to taking action. and I think sometimes we spend too much on one and not doing the other.
So I have a theory about why things happen in Sweden. So in Sweden, we had it started in the 70s. We got fire protection engineers coming into the fire service. So fire protection engineers with a senior degree, and now our fire protection engineers that go into fire service, they study for 4.5 years plus 1 year, so they're 5.5 years in school. Last year is geared toward the fire service. The other ones are a generic fire protection engineering degree, and they go in laterally through the ranks of the organization. So majority of our fire chiefs and senior officers in Sweden are fire protection engineers.
Wow.
There's no law that says it has to be that way. It's just the culture has been that way, and and that has been a tremendous amount of good things. I think that by large, even though I'm not a fire protection engineer, and there was, of course, when that started happening, there was a lot of battle because a lot of people coming from below, firefighters going up through the ranks, hit a ceiling where people came in from the top and just go like, who's this punk?
Right.
So it created a lot of problems, but those are pretty much gone because of just time. Overall, I thought it'd been a benefit because it gave a lot more theoretical understanding about anything in fire service, other things we do than just firefighting, about how to structure the organizations and stuff like that. But one of the things that I think it played a part in is the way of thinking about the dynamic decision process, because they came in and they generally are sort of regional commanders or battalion chiefs and above, and they usually come in and run very large scenes. And their philosophy has always been, and they're heavily influenced by American books and so on, like, a lot of, like Brunelleschi and so on, has been focused on the dynamic process. Like the way of doing command at that level in Sweden is very, it should be very non-rigid. It should be very low prestige. It should be very discussion about what should we do, have meetings. That's slow.
Yeah.
But but if you're in an instant where you're going to be there for hours and hours, you have that time. Because it's so important to gather all the information, to talk it through. What do you think is the best idea? I think best. Okay, that sounds like a good one. Let's run with that. Everybody thinks it's good. Okay, let's run with that. I think that way of doing command on that type of incident is very good. I think that what I've seen from America sometimes, I think it's the one lone ranger sitting there on top trying to make all the decisions, and that doesn't really work when you become too complicated. There's too many variables, there's too much information to take in and so on, and you need that sort of, we call the beehive, where all the bees start to buzz. But what I think is the problem is that philosophy fracture down into places it shouldn't be, where at captain level, for instance. At captain level should not be a beehive, because there's not enough time, there's not enough possibility to do that. So it's structured down, this dynamic process. It should be the discussions, debate, and so on. And it became, again, with the removal of a lot of pre-assignments and so on, that it became a slow system. And slow is of course not just a problem of being slow, that we're not as efficient in doing things. It's that you get sort of, it might be that you get slow to the point where you become dangerous, because you're behind all the time instead of acting.
Right.
But it is, I think that looking at it, do you see that there is a point where command should be less pre-assigned, in that sense that it should be more dynamic? If you look at command, not first arriving unit, you look at, like an hour incident or a 4 hour incident.
No, absolutely. And I would hope certainly in our system that we would do that. Discretionary time is always a good thing when you have it, and take advantage of it. A big incident like that, you got to worry about the integrity of the building, runoff, all those things. And I think the more people you get involved in that, the better off. And I think in the area that we're in here in the North Texas area, we do a pretty good job of that. It's not just one person dictating all that. Now, I know it happens in a lot of places, but we try to build a command team pretty quick. And then if we, like, for example, we're getting our first high rises. And so I'm trying to figure out a way in our system to build in where I'm going to get somebody who's experienced in Dallas, who's fought a lot of high rise fires, as part of our, maybe as a senior advisor, to be part of our team. That's certainly a call I would make early on, because I don't have the experience doing that. Now, I still may be the incident commander, but I'm talking to a lot of people, maybe in law enforcement, maybe in environmental, whatever, to come to those conclusions. And I've been involved in several operations where we've had success doing that. So I agree with you totally. But I know there's organizations that don't do that. I don't understand why they don't. But discretionary time is always a good thing. And the more heads you can get focusing on a problem, the more likely you're going to come to a better solution. I don't think there's an argument against that.
No, I didn't think no. And I'm glad at least you're.
Well, we can't do that in the first. No. We can't do that in the first few minutes of a structure fire where, we've got that window of opportunity. And I think that sometimes in the fire service, we have a hard time drawing that line. Where do you have to be very proactive versus when do you have time to do what you're saying? And we mess that up sometimes.
Yeah, I think that was what happens in Sweden. We let that philosophy permeate further down than it should have. But it was always done on the pretense that it was good, in the sense that we were going to be dynamic, and that sounds good. I mean, it's only bad if you can't be it in reality, which is the case. But it sounds good. And if it sounds good, that's people at least hope to be it, because people want to be good, and then again they want to be dynamic. So it was an easy sell to do that, which make me a very hard time. I mean, I'm sort of the outlier in Sweden, at least, trying to push things. And it's very hard to sell that message that we have to make you a system where you will have less options. I want to dictate you more, because bottom line, I don't think you can handle it. Now, I have to, of course, phrase that as I don't think anyone can handle it, and I for sure cannot handle it, and that's, of course, how I sell it. I need to sell that first. I have to start with a story about me failing a lot and realizing that I failed because I was not enough, and therefore I think we should have a different system. So it's about framework and making them like me, because if they don't like me, they're not going to listen to me if I tell them that they're stupid. But it was a very hard sell to make, and I'm very happy that at least some of America has the same. But I was surprised. I thought that the pre-assigned models were more, but I have like anyone else a warped sense of reality, because I talk to people that are generally fire nerds, and they tell me how their department runs, and generally if they're fire nerds, they run with the department that had at least some work put into it, and they generally have very good, or at least an outline for a good pre-assignment, some kind of standard operating guideline that says you should do this and this and this, and we extract. And I like the word you used, address. You should address this problem. You should address this problem. Now, some have also, like I have, when I write my own suggestions, those guidelines go down to firefighter level, and saying that if you should attack the fire from, through a window, the basic guideline says you should use a straight stream. You should use close to the wall. There's a guideline for each task too. It's still a guideline. Nothing says you have to do that. Right. There's still a guidelines, and if you don't have any other option, if you don't feel that this is necessarily a bad thing, you just go with the guideline that says this. So it's very detailed in that. Now, where I struggle is mostly at officer level, not firefighter level. Firefighter level, they're like, we love that we get these guidelines. It's excellent. Like I like that guideline, like that guideline. We could discuss the actual guideline, but to actually have guidelines, I think firefighters are very get it. My resistance.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you.
My resistance is from the officers. And do you think it's because they feel that they are supposed to be more dynamic than firefighters, or why is it?
I think it goes back to what I'm saying, a philosophy, right? It's so in our, and you may have it there, I don't know, but we can't decide what the best nozzle to use is. We've been fighting over that here forever. Smooth bores versus we don't know how to, we don't agree on one way to ventilate a building, right?
Yeah.
So you're familiar with vent enter search, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. I believe that that's a life-saving tactic, right? I think that any department should be able to do that, but not all officers agree with that. So I think it's a philosophy of based on how I was brought up, how I was taught, my experiences, and to some degree, I think there's even a little bit of fear. The least I can commit my crew, the safer we are, right? And so you've got to understand, and if you're going to put people in harm's way, there's obviously a risk involved, and I think some people their risk acceptance level is minimal. I'm never going to put anybody on a roof. Well, okay, but you're taking away that option on the fire ground if you say that. So I think it's a philosophy, maybe even a principle thing. And that's where I was going to say, I can't justify that then, because the system, the other thing we got to remember with these options is we're a team. We get multiple, we got to be working towards one direction. And if everybody's looking at that differently and applying their philosophies and their principles, we're going in 1,000, we're not working towards a standard outcome. And we can't deviate from that, or then it's freelance and it's chaos, right?
So yeah, and I agree. I mean, it's natural that when you move up the hierarchy, risk becomes a more problematic topic, because risk as a firefighter is, yeah, you're responsible. You have legal And a lot of moral, like I'm supposed to, like Johnny or Lisa is going to go home to their family, in the evening. And then, of course, every officer wants that to happen. So risk becomes problematic. But so one thing I talked about it, like in Sweden, the risk is, it says the law. If you go to work, you should get hurt. It doesn't matter if you're a firefighter or a police officer or a plumber. It doesn't really matter. The law is the same. You shouldn't get hurt if you go to work. Meaning, and to me, when I interpret that, I say, well, it means that I cannot, as an employer, if I'm a representative of an employer, like say, if I'm an officer, I'm a representative. I represent the employer, the state or the city. I cannot force anyone to do something that is dangerous to them, because then I'm like I'm not following the law. But there's nothing that says in the Swedish legislation that says that you can't do dangerous things, and saying that this is not the norm. I'm playing outside of the playbook here. It says as an officer, I'm saying, well, let's take a roof. I said, well, our department has a policy that you shouldn't go to roof because it might be dangerous. That's arguably, of course, if it's going to building construction, you shouldn't go to roofs. Right. But if you want to go to roof, it's fine, but it's on you. Like, we can't order you to do it, but it's nothing, you can, if you want to take that risk, it's up to you, and I'll support you with the resources if you want to take that risk. Is there a problem having a system that works like that? Sort of like the employer can expect something from the employee at a certain amount of risk that they shouldn't get hurt, or at least not die when they do firefighting, but the individual can take as much risk as they want.
Well, and your exact thing, I always say, I can order you to the roof, but I can't order you on the roof. That decision is going to be made by that company officer and that firefighter. But here's a concern that I have, and I learned a lot from this. So, we've been having these active shooter incidents in the United States, going all the way back with Columbine. And during those, police had a certain stance, and the citizens said, we're not going to accept that anymore. And so
they had a very defensive stance to wait for reinforcements and so on.
Right. Yeah. And so something I show in my program is from our sheriff here in Denton County, and his words are very clear. We will not hide behind a barricade. We will not wait for assistance. We will go in and we will do our job and stop the threat. So what does that look like in the fire service? We can say all these things all day long, but at some point our citizens are going to say, I'm investing in this level of protection and I expect a certain return. Yeah. A step level higher than what I'm going to take as a civilian with no training and no protective clothing. So I don't think we can get too far off base with that, or we're going to have other people telling us how to do our job. Nobody wants to get hurt. And I got two boys on the job who are dear to me, but I talk about the difference between safety and risk management. If we keep focusing, to me, safe is two options: wear it, don't wear it, go, don't go. We only give where, if we talk about risk management and our risk acceptance, where we can identify risk, prioritize them, and then look at the things we do to manage them, it gives us a whole different way of looking at things. So just little things like that, I think, position us better to deal with risks and not make the job safe, but make it safer or less dangerous. That needs to be the key. We're never going to make it safe. There's always going to be a chance for harm if we're going into fires. I mean, look at as simple as being on a roadway. You guys respond to car accidents? Yeah. Right? Just putting somebody in a roadway, to me, is more dangerous than putting them in a burning building. We get firefighters hit by cars all the time. So what do we need to do to identify those risks and manage them? To me, it needs to be the focus.
Yeah, I think it is. I deal with this. I started more thinking about this when I actually became a part-time firefighter, and I went to my small fire truck, because I respond in that case with a small fire truck, and I arrive first.
And you're going to show up by yourself.
Yeah, I'm by myself, and in that scenario, I'm both the fire officer, but the only one I'm commanding is myself. And I go like, am I allowed to command myself into that building without an SCBA? I'm breaking the rules. because I think about it, like if I arrived there by myself, not wearing fire gear and everything, what would I do? And it is pretty strange to me that I find myself giving a different answer, saying if I don't have gear on and blue lights on my car, I would probably do more than if I have blue lights and in that case go like that's
you're not regulated, right?
Yeah,
you're not.
Yeah. Then I could just do whatever I feel like, right. what I feel is safe enough for the priority. But if I have blue lights on my car, I go like, yeah, well now I can't do it. And that's a strange thing to realize, that I don't know how to deal with that.
But you know what the true test is, though, really, to me, when you're traveling around the world doing your thing, and your two kids and your wife, what level of commitment would you expect somebody coming to your house if there's a fire, right?
I mean, and we have this discussion,
yeah, and you know, to me, that's the balance is, you know, what would I expect, and I'm going to try to produce a system that's going to deliver that level of service and push it right up to the line where we're not recklessly aggressive. We're not, you know, kamikaze putting firefighters in there. We know they're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
We're taking them right up to that line. And I think that's the balance that we got to try to figure out. Otherwise, our citizens are going to figure it out for us. I have every confidence that that's going to happen if we don't figure it out.
Oh yeah, I mean I think the Swedish fire service, at least, and like many American fire services, we are at some levels very good at basically make ourselves unemployable because it's not just because of risk. I wouldn't say that the Swedish fire is risk averse. I wouldn't say that at all. But it's there's put so many checks and balances on everything that the administration of running the fire service is costing more than to actually run the fire service. It's a mess. That's a separate issue. But anyway, right. It ties into this. It is a problem that we, and again, I don't know how to address this because I don't want recklessness. When a Swedish firefighter thinks about American firefighters, there's just like when American firefighter thinks about a European firefighters. We have this stereotype, and there's different stereotypes. But in Americans, they're running into buildings, where smashing every window, running into buildings, there's fire everywhere, and things are melting, and people are screaming, and we're a hero because we did everything right. It's a cowboy mentality, which I know is right. Which is not true. But there is this thing, like when I started traveling in America, I was astounded by the lack of understanding of fire behavior. That was apparent, and it was
shame on us. Shame on us.
Yeah, it was. And what my problem with that was, of course, there's a problem of not understanding fire and so on. But if you say that you want to do risk management, like the key thing about that is, of course, understanding the risk, and you're not really brave if you don't know what the risk is. If a flashover, I'm not saying this is true now, but if you go back 15 years when I started sort of poking in America, like people did not understand what a flashover was, could not read the sign. In reality, read the sign. It was sort of like magical. Like it sometimes it happens and sometimes it didn't. And it was sort of like, if the beast is alive, it's alive, bro. Like it was, in that case, you're not able to do risk assessment. You're basically saying that, well, let's roll the dice and see what happens. Sometimes I break the window and nothing happens. Everything gets better. Smoke goes out, and next time I break a window, holy crap, everything lights off. In that case, how do you risk assess that? It's just,
well, you can't because risk management is a commitment. It's a commitment. You got to understand fire behavior, building construction, all those things. That's where it comes. It comes from knowledge, right? And things that are reproduced. Now we have the science, the UL and NIST is helping us, but there's still some departments that don't even know it exists. And so it's the whole commitment to it. You can't risk manage if you don't understand that. You can't do it. And so you go back to a safe versus unsafe act or or just, relying on what we've done in the past and hope that we can reproduce it again. And that's luck.
I mean, a lot of the reason we have standards or in standards for worker safety is, Johnny did something stupid. Nobody could do what Johnny did.
Right.
Like, right. Which is, for instance, VIS. So somebody does something that was not, like, they didn't check the floor when it went in. They didn't consider closing the door to close off the flow path. They didn't, and someone get burnt or someone died or whatever. I don't know if someone died at VIS, probably, but so Johnny did something stupid, VIS. Nobody gets to do VIS or VES or targeted search, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And I, some say, okay, that's a standard written in blood. Like, you have to respect that. And go like, well, I mean, is it? Is that the only way to solve that issue? Like, you can never do in that case going through a window, but we can go into doors. Like, what's the difference between a door and a window? Like, can you go downhill from a door into the basement? Sure, you can. So why can't you go into a window in that case? Well, and it's. We again, going back to, we have a limited amount of time. So in some cases, it seems to me valid to make a decision that says, okay, the majority of fire starters, we can't train to a level that they can handle this risk assessment. So we're just going to say it's off topic. Let's say you can't go to the roof because, we can't commit to the training needed to go to the roof. But
let me interrupt you there for just because that's the point. So you said something very important. Right. It's one thing to say that vertical vent is too dangerous or going to the roof is too dangerous. You open a whole nother can of worms when you start asking, how much did they train? When's the last time they did it? So that's a very valuable point. And you got to look at those differently. Is it too dangerous, or we just don't have the time to commit to be more successful doing it? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that was a very great point that you said. And it's one or the other. But they're two different elements of looking at it.
Yeah, but I think the discussion is also framed in that, in the sense that we said, we're not going to go to the roof. The question is rarely, okay, under which circumstances would you allow go to the roof? Right. Okay, if we had more training, if we understood it better, if our building construction was different, and so on. Now,
there you go.
But it is still a very hard question, because you as an instructor, I'm forced to, basically through my influence, saying that I think this is a valuable standard. I think you should this and this and this. And that's based on what I think is, I don't think you will be able to train your firefighters to a level where you can make this into a dynamic process. So just do this or never do that. So you're always faced with some subjectively thinking that this is never going to fly, so let's not do it. I mean, Sweden, we do, just to take vertical ventilation, we have no prohibition doing against vertical ventilation. It's used a lot. I mean, the reason we stopped doing vertical ventilation a lot is simply because of building construction. It takes too much time. The people, the Swedish houses are built to last, and they're built to withstand the environment, which is snow and everything. It's like
right.
It's not easy to cut a hole through a roof and do something useful with it. But it's still, it's the framework of saying we're never gonna do vertical ventilation, or we're never gonna be in the roof, is still up to the instructor a lot of times, if not the department makes the policy. I mean, for instance, something big, my vertical ventilation might be a department policy saying we're going to go to the roof or not, or something like that. But a lot of times when it comes to details, you do tick training, whatever, it's up to the instructor to decide what is too hard and what is not. And you're constantly faced with those small changes, saying that I think that this is too complicated for firefighters, so we'll just simplify it and say never do this and always do this.
And there's nothing that's got to be looked at, though, right? Because there are some situations where you're never gonna, if your system is small and can't train, and that's okay. That you got to take that off the table, right? But then if we're going to do that, we have to identify those things that we can do that are going to make a difference. If not this, what, right? we're not ever going to go to the roof, we still have to address ventilation. So let's talk about what we can do there and how that works. And maybe that's all we do. Understanding that is part of the solution to the problem. But it's the reason why we do it. I think some people just default and say that looks too dangerous or that looks too scary, therefore we shall not do it. You know, one of the drives of going to this engine and truck thing is that I knew that the people that were going to the roof have done it recently. They're the most practiced at doing it. So that's an action step for making it less dangerous, for managing risk, versus putting somebody on there that hasn't done it in 5 years. That's positioning them for failure. Then somebody falls through the roof. We say, oh, vertical ventilation is too dangerous. No, we put somebody up there that wasn't prepared to do it. It goes back to your training scenario.
So how big is Colony?
The city, we're just under 50,000. We're 18 square miles. We have 30 positions on each day, but 6 of those are paramedics. So we have 24 assigned to fire suppression.
In the city. In
the city, right? Yeah. And we don't have any counties, so all our cities butt up against one another. So I mean, I can get fire trucks all day long if I have to. Rural area. We have no rural area.
Because it is a diff. I mean, in Sweden, normal, a 50,000 person city would have, it would be rare if you find anywhere more than 5 firefighters on shift.
With 50,000?
Yeah, you would.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we have a lot. Well, let's ask. And I think that's play. I mean, you talked about getting water on the fire.
But again, it goes about building construction and all that again, though.
Oh yeah, well, the fire services works within the system. I mean, it really is. So I mean, it's politics, it's building construction, it's laws and regulations and so on. So every fires have by experience of 150 years gotten to the point where they've reached the perfect system. It's just not true, of course. But I mean, there's always reasons. I'm not saying it's good reasons, but there's always reason for why things happen. But anyway, so we're way fewer firefighters, and that, I mean, so for us, all our firefighters are cross-trained. That's the norm in Sweden. I mean, of course, it to get cross trains on multiple vehicles, you would, usually it's not the first year, it's the second, third, or whatever it might be, depending on the station. Right. But everyone is cross-trained. And the reasons for everyone being cross-trained is if you only have 5 people, how do you split them into something special? And if you split them into something special, if one wants to take a day off, how do you make sure that position is filled? Like there's not firefighter efficiency related reasons for being cross-trained. It's not because we think it's more efficient on the fire ground. It's just practical to maintain people on shift to be cross-trained. So in that case also, when you talk about water on the fire, that's pretty normal for Sweden because we typically don't have an option to go to the roof and go to the fire, for instance. I mean, so it's natural that first arriving unit goes to the fire. Meaning, and when the second unit arrives, that's the neighboring city that comes. That's 10 minutes away, or 15 minutes away, or 20 minutes away. Or in the northern part of Sweden, that's 2 hours away.
Right. And that's what you have to work with, though, right? What you have is what you have.
But it's interesting because, the philosophy behind splitting into trucks and engines is the main driving philosophy where you can specialize more, or is there more to it?
No, it's just that. It's if you look at the science of performance, right, you can start preparing mentally before a fire. If you know what you're going to be doing, you can start to develop that mental imagery, pre-performance preparation, and so you can kind of load the hard drive. And then the fact is that you're very comfortable doing what you're going to be doing because it's been, I mean, there's a reason why plumbers don't do plumbing one day and electrical the next day and so forth, right? And
of course.
I'm not the police chief another day. In America, I would guess that most staffing is done based on ease for the battalion chief. Just put a butt in a seat, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Johnny, it's your turn to ride the truck. Mike, it's your turn to ride the engine. And we get away with that. But if we're going to say we're going to less fires, how do we maximize those to get the most experience? Do you want somebody doing kind of the same thing over and over again where they can make improvements, or do you want them doing something different every fire? That's kind of a personal choice, and that's a philosophical consideration. My belief is I want people kind of doing the same thing over and over again so that they get not an expert, but a high proficiency at doing that. That's just how I chose to commit the Colony Fire Department, and it works for us. It may not work everywhere.
No, I would love to specialize units more, or I just don't see the possibility for the vast majority of the Swedish fire service. Even the big cities like Stockholm with 1 million people, they can specialize more, of course, but they're still very cross-trained anyway because of multiple reasons. Their fire stations are still 5 people every fire station, and it takes a while for the next station to arrive and so on. So of course there's more special vehicles. Now the only I know that in Oslo, which is the capital of Norway, so our neighboring sister country or brother country, call it whatever you like. We owned them for a while back in history. But we gave them away, and then they found oil, and then they became richer, the bastards.
That always works, right?
Yeah. In hindsight, we should have kept them. But anyway, so we are very similar, Norway and Sweden, for instance. But in Oslo, they have their smoke diving special units. So they're specialized. They have 3 units in Oslo, more stations, and basically the surrounding stations, they arrive at scene, and they of course do the interior attack also. But if they're basically tasked with deploying the hose lines, getting everything, and when the specialized forces come, they just pick up the hose line and go in and do interior attack. Sort of how I understand like a lot of rescue units operate. They can go in and just basically take over tasks that others are doing because they're very specially trained on those tasks. I would love to do that, but the number of staffing we have sort of does not allow it on a generic level. And in that sense, I would love if the Swedish Fire Service did at EMS, because that would be our only possible ticket to get more staffing.
People. How do you address search? How do you guys address search on your residential structures?
So there's multiple answers to that, because if you go back in history, if you go back in time, it was basically you went into a fire, the first arriving, the team went in, and basically you did the left or right hand search. If you found the fire, you'd put the fire out. If you find a victim, you drag them out. There wasn't really much thought into it, and that was the prevailing thought that was for a long time. And I mean, we didn't have ticks, so finding the fire was not very easy. We didn't have ticks, so finding victims wasn't very easy. So it was sort of like a luck thing. And of course, if you were better at it, you were faster. If you put some thought into it, the sort of, I think the fire is that way, let's take a left-hand search. But it wasn't, the priority was people. His priority was to search rather than fire. Simply because that was a higher list of priorities on the basically the ratio table. Rescue is the highest priority, so let's go for search. Now that switched, and that switched when the philosophy was you have to put water on the fire to stop the threat, because it takes too much time if you start searching. It becomes dangerous. The search is too slow. You can't see anything. And also with the tick, you can find the fire so much faster. So fire knockdown could be 2 minutes after you put your boots over the door. So I think that the majority is going for right now, because again, most departments can only do one thing. There's only 2 firefighters going inside,
right?
And they can only do one thing, and they're going for fire attack. And as soon as fire attack is, as soon as you achieve knockdown, you go for ventilation. As soon as you start ventilation, you start with search.
Okay.
Now, we've had to change that, and that change is not still done. We still have departments that go in basically randomly, I would say, left or right hand, and if you find the fire, you put that out. Find the victim, you put that out. There's also departments that still say that we're going to go in and search for people first. I would say that's the wrong choice because it's too slow. The fire does what the fire does. It develops. It puts up poison. So we're in the process of making that, I would say, more fire attack prioritized, and search being the second priority. Now, I would still argue that rescue is still priority one, of course, but it's just that we put the fire out to allow ventilation, and the ventilation is really what saves lives, I would say, not the search in particular. I know that that's a lot of people say that search is the most important. I would disagree. I would say that fire attack and then ventilation and then search is the most important. But
with limited resources, right? So, and that's kind of why I asked the question. But yeah, if you can increase that personnel that show up, then you can do things simultaneously. You can attack and so that's what and I think if you have limited people, obviously fire attack has to be first, right? I don't. There are people that would argue, but I don't think that is a good argument. And just, and so when I talk about when you have these multiple, you're just doing simultaneously doing things, and that's where the specialization comes in. I mean, all our guys can do everything. It's just if we want to minimize that reaction time, I think you give them a mental advantage by having them be in that mindset.
Yeah, but we have also, I mean, there's multiple things I want to change. I mean, America's, again, and this is, if we specifically talk search, I think Sweden has always been hampered by, Johnny did something stupid, so now you can't go in without a hose line. So we are by law required to have a hose line if we're going to a fire. You cannot search without a hose line. It's by law, and it's been that for as long as we had hose lines, because Johnny did something stupid. Now you need a hose line, and that of course is a very limiting factor. So and that has been hampering in the sense, of course, you're faster searching without a hose line. That's just the bottom line.
Right.
Now, there are, of course, gray areas where I'm trying to, personally, so when you do the fire attack, you go in and do the fire attack, and then you start to ventilate. And as soon as you start to ventilate, our rules is sort of gray, because it says you should have a hose line with you when you do firefighting. But after you dampen the fire, is it really firefighting? Is it just smoke-filled environment and no real risk of fire? It is. We're playing with words in the Swedish legislation to make it more efficient, saying that, well, you can after you do the fire attack, you drop the hose line with the nozzle outside of the fire compartment, then you can search off the hose line into compartments. You don't have to drag the hose line actually into the compartment. That makes us a little bit faster, and I would still argue safe, because you're basically 10 feet or 15 feet from a hose line. And that's positioned in the hallway. So if you go in the hallway, you're going to find that hose line. But that is a gray area. This is sort of like we can't research without a hose line, but let's say we can search off a hose line. and that has been because search. I would argue we have not. I've taken most, if not everything, of my ideas to search from America in sense of how to, primary search, secondary search. Now I've modified them to what I would say my flavor, and based on the Swedish Fire Service and how to structure that. But we didn't do primary search, secondary search, for instance. We didn't. It was all one search. It was very slow because it was methodical. But being methodical is not very good at saving lives. That's good at finding people that are stuck in a closet somewhere, but that's not the norm. The norm is that they're in their bed or they're in their sofa or whatever. So let's check those places first, and if they're clear, let's do a secondary search that's more methodical. But the things like that and how to structure that's not been a priority on the Swedish Fire Service, even though we would think that we did.
Well,
So at least we learned something from the Americans, and also the straight stream. That's a different one. That's a whole different concept, also. But I want before the thing about specialization. I would love that we could specialize more, and I think that we have still a lot of lessons to learn from, in that case, America, about the truck and engine split and how you write your operating guidelines for truck operation and guidance. I think you could use a lot of that for Swedish Fire Service too, in saying that if when you operate as a truck company, even if you're cross-trained, these are the things you should address and so on. I think there's a lot of valuable things we can take from that in the Swedish Fire Service. So I still think that the specialized guidelines for different units, even if you're cross-trained, is important. Even though Absolutely. You can't specialize the training itself, because you need to be cross-trained.
Right. Yeah, but more of a functional thing of that, a skill set, but who, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So when I think about, you talked about you touch upon it. We talked about when you started in the colony and you wanted to change some things. Going back to, so one thing you changed was the engine and ladder thing. When you sat down with now you're a fairly small fire department, so you could sit down with each individual company and say, hey, this is my thoughts, this is what I want to do. When you faced resistance, did you face it up front, or did you face it like after you left?
No, up front. Absolutely up front. Right. And it's listening, answering questions, not blowing them off. If you couldn't answer the question, getting back to them, all those sound leadership principles. And one by one, people would come over. But then it got to a point where, okay, let's just see how it goes. And like I said, the biggest selling point was when the naysayers saw fires going better. Then it kind of sold itself. And I would tell you today, Lars, I don't think you could find anybody in our system that would even consider going back. They believe in it because they've had success. Now, we could have a bad night tonight and it could all be out the window. But what 10 years of experience is showing us is that for our system, with the things that we have and the fires that we go to, it works in the colony, Texas.
So I've done multiple tours to United States doing teaching, but also just riding fire trucks and so on. And one of my experience was I went to a fire department and it was a training class, and the battalion got together at one of the stations, and there was a divisional chief coming there and doing a class, like a 1-hour class on wind-driven fires. It was before UL became mainstream. It's still not mainstream, because it's surprisingly few who have heard of it when you go out. It's just mind-boggling how you can live under a rock. But anyway, it was sort of before that. I mean, NIST was of course doing things, and NIST has done sort of like there was some wind-driven studies on ranch houses and so on.
Did. Yeah, way back.
Yeah, and that was fairly early and so on. It was on the line, and basically the division chief came there and he was doing a PowerPoint. And I think it was very rudimentary. It was very basic and basically the message was, maybe, just maybe, if there's a lot of wind outside, think about not doing massive ventilation. So it was very cautious. It was not, you should never do ventilation. You shouldn't do it was very cautious about, let's not make sure that people get caught in the flow path if we break windows and make a big hole in the roof. And I thought it was sort of like, from my perspective from Sweden, I was, this was basic, because we have a lot more understanding about fire. So this was not news. It was sort of like, okay. Mm-hmm. But so that was one of my experience. But when the division chief left, the battalion chief stood up and said, okay, you heard what the division chief said. I want you to forget everything about it. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to do what we do. We're going to go with it. We're going to open everything up. And he just basically ripped everything away. And with my context going back for that, I was so struck by the dysfunction of the organization that I did not find words how to describe that, because in my context it was so far off anything I could have ever imagined happening.
And I would say that happens more times than you could imagine.
And
I don't think that was the exception. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I could not see that that was the exception, because people didn't seem to be found about it. And that's sort of that, like, yeah, they were like, yeah, I agree with the battalion chief, because it's our battalion chief. We're going to do what he says, not what the brass up top says. And I said, how do you get to a point like that? Where what happened to that department to get to that point? Regardless of that was true or not about how to address wind-driven fires, just how can you have that dysfunctionality?
That's a culture, right? That's part of their culture. And you remember when I talked to you about survivability being based on philosophy, right? Yeah. That's a perfect example of that. But that's a culture. I'd say that's an organization that lacks standards, you know, and it's basically, it's up to each battalion chief to run the show the way that they see is best to run. And it's very dysfunctional. But for every situation that occurs like that, every level above has allowed that to happen to a degree. Right? There's no surprise, and it's shocking to you. I don't think I would be as shocked, because I think it happens here pretty regularly. But I mean, egos are involved. You know, my battalion is the most aggressive. Therefore, we're going to do things our way. Those people uptown don't know how to fight fire. I mean, there's 1,000 little catchphrases we come up with. None of them are valid. But and that's why we get firefighters killed the way we do sometimes, because we do things like that. But to me, that's a culture thing. It's, you know, the culture is what the organization values. And right there's a breakdown in the value of the person who is the higher rank coming in with information. It's totally disregarded. That right there is dysfunctional.
So the statement water boils from the bottom up is used a lot in America, meaning that, you know, like the bottom can affect change, and sort of like it's where the change come from, and the brass is basically just slow to get on. You know, we can make things happen if we, you know, get together. I mean, that's part of it, that in the sense that, you know, the ones up top is basically working against us, or at least not with us. Is that, how do you think about a statement like that, like the water boils from the bottom up?
So the American Fire Service right now is split, I think, and we're struggling with that. In organizations that value their people, and that their people are a value to the organization, absolutely, good ideas can come from the bottom up, and we did that when we redesigned our engines. So yeah, that I think that's a healthy organization. But there are more organizations who say, this is the way it is. It's coming from the top. This is the way we're going to do it. There's no alternative. It's the law of the land, and you go forward. But, you know, the more rules you have, the more rule breakers. But I think both occur, and we're struggling with that right now, is to try to figure out, you know, who should have that influence. Obviously, the largest part of any organization is its firefighters, right? We have more of that than we have anything else, and they're the ones who go out and do the job. So as a chief, as a leader, I'd be stupid to not listen to what they have to say. Now, we got to rein that in sometime. You know, we got to keep it in the box, but that's valuable information. But I will tell you, there's an equal number of chiefs out there who will disagree with what I just said.
Yeah, and I see that, because my experience from going around teaching, and I talk to just the sheer amount of instructors and everything, is I get a sense that it's basically impossible to change anything from the bottom if you don't have the right person to talk to. And that's just seemed to be, at least, I mean I talk to people for
probably in a bigger organization. In bigger organizations it is, but in our small organization it's not. I would tell you that. Because based on that, when I teach, I say you have to be ruthless when if your strategy is to change something, you have to be ruthless at finding the key players to influence.
And that has to be, of course, informal leaders, which are, you know, boys from bottom up. There's a lot of informal leaders that get that position rightfully so or not. They might just be loud, but they're still informal leaders. And there's formal leaders, and they might not be informal leaders, but they have the formal rank or decision power to make things happen. And you have to find them both. Now, the vast majority of people are not important because they will follow those key players. Like, but you cannot, it doesn't matter if you have 15 informal leaders. If you don't have a formal leader, meaning someone who actually had the budget or the time allocation or could buy things, whatever it might be, you're doomed.
No, absolutely. But I don't think it has to be an either or, right? I mean, if you value your people, you value your people, and if good ideas come up, I mean, I would be kind of foolish if the newest firefighter sat down and said, Chief, I see an opportunity here, or I see a solution to a problem. Here it is, and it makes sense to me. Why would we not? Now, I think in a bigger organization, probably someplace like FDNY, Philadelphia, some of those, you don't have a chance of changing it. But in a majority of what the American Fire Service is, 10, 5, 4 stations, I think it's very doable. It's more of an attitude and a culture thing than anything else.
When I again, I'm a little bit biased. When I go to this is larger fire services I'm talking about. Yeah. I was also, because Swedish is very informal. Like basically any firehouse in Sweden, if the fire chief sits around the table with other firefighters and officers, you wouldn't know who's the fire chief.
Cool.
A lot of times, no insignias. Like, there's nothing visually that separates them, but you couldn't see that there's some sort of informal rank and respect paid to the fire chief. That has nothing to do with the fire services. It has everything to do with the Swedish mentality about not liking authorities, but still liking. That's complicated. But anyway, in that sense, not liking authorities. That it's the tall puppy syndrome. The Australians call it. You shouldn't think you are something just because you have a higher rank than me. So everybody at the same level. It's basically communism. It's part of communism, the ugly part of the world. But anyway, so like, you shouldn't, because everyone should be equal, and everyone should be equal. You can't value someone higher, because in that case, otherwise it's devalued, which is a huge problem. But anyway, so when I went to America, I was sort of surprised because there was this informal and formal rank system. And, the battalion chief got a bigger dorm, a single bunk bed, or bigger officers, insignias, and everything. Yeah, and I was very unused to that. But it was, in Sweden, it's very typical. The leader style is very informal, and it's, the open door policy. You can always go into my room and tell me what's wrong and so on. And that's very true. Like, I would say that, every firefighter can typically say whatever they like to the fire chief, mutual respect, of course, and say, I think this is wrong, I think this is bad, and everything. Yeah, there is very open door policy. But in America, I get the feeling that people were sort of scared of saying something that the chief wouldn't like, or the officer wouldn't like, and sort of like, it's their ship and they're going to steer it, and I'm going to do what they tell me to. And for me, that was I thought it's a dangerous position, because it makes the leaders sort of living in their own yes-saying world, where everybody just smiled and said, yes, boss.
And you're not wrong with that assessment. And I think that the people that would want to challenge that would say, well, okay, on the fire ground, you can't, in our system, you don't have a lot of time to ask questions, right? That's where not at all. You got to make a decision, and it's a paramilitary structure. Yeah. But I would absolutely agree with you that in most fire department organizations, you got to go through the chain of command. They're very cautious on, maybe not with their company officer, but very cautious when they go to the chief. I know when somebody comes into my office, I want them to have a well thought out position, right? Yeah. Tell me what the problem is. Tell me what the plan is to fix it. Otherwise, I'm just going to get a ton of people in there telling me what's wrong. And if I don't fix it, I don't like them, right? And all those other things. But that's just Yeah. I mean, I think your assessment's probably spot on, and it's probably not healthy.
So what is an appropriate level of, because I mean the downside of our system is that we have no problem on the fire ground. It's not that people disobey orders just because you're not my boss, and that's not. But the downside is that if you don't have a respect in that sense, that there, you got a little bit of brass and there's people like looking up to you, and you get a nicer dorm. Like, why would you go anywhere? Why would you strive anywhere if where you're going just means that you get more to do? There's a healthy side of it to want to go somewhere where you get sort of some benefits. You get some formal power, you get some informal cred when you get a high rank, but still not get to the point where again you just have a lot of yes sayers pointing at you, which makes you immune to the reality of what people are feeling and saying. How do you
I
find?
think that's where you got to be a good leader. For me, I can only speak for myself. My motivation to be a fire chief is I always had this vision in my head of what I thought the suburban fire service should look like. I didn't think we were getting it right in the places that I'd worked before, and based how I was raised. And so the higher you go, the more influence you have to budget and other things. So that's my motivation. Is there a lot more work? Absolutely. Is there not a lot more responsibility? But, you can only complain about things for so long until you're willing to put yourself in a position to positively influence that. And that's a decision I made. And, I hope when I'm off of this earth, my legacy will be that I contributed positively to the fire service for the right reason, not because I wanted more crap hanging on my collar, but because I put in the work to do the research to figure out a better way. And then I had the courage to try to sell that and educate people on it. But yeah, I mean, some people who take the promotion and then they don't want that responsibility. And then it becomes a dysfunctional firehouse or battalion. And there's a lot of that. But I guess it depends on what your motivation is.
How certain are you that you're getting a good sense of the land in Colony? I know it's a personal question.
Well,
that people are actually telling you what they think and say.
No, probably, if I were to put a percentage on it, I'd probably say 70%. Now, we just had something happen in our organization that kind of set us back. Prior to that, I would have told you I had a very good pulse because I was going into the firehouse quite a bit and having the talks. And my battalion chiefs are very dialed in. We had a little bit of setback. So we're working to kind of regain that two-way trust. Do I know everything? I find out everything eventually, but I think the critical stuff I have a very good sense of. The things that the men and women need to be successful. And if they have a real problem, I find out about it. Now there's probably some minor things that I don't, but I think the critical stuff between the battalion chiefs, the ops chief, and myself, I think we have a pretty good pulse on. And we do some things. We have a very robust mentoring program where officers, everybody meets with people on a regular basis, and we draw that. We just what we call engage the colony survey, which is where we ask people to rate us on stuff, and it's, nobody signs their name to it. So we do a lot of things, different ways to try to find that out. But, I think on the important stuff, we have a real good idea.
Do you have a warning sign that if I hear this or if I see this, I'm far off?
Absolutely. And that's, when I talk about culture, morale, and climate, I can go into a firehouse and tell when something's off. But yeah, we're very fortunate. I'll give you an example. We haven't had anybody leave the organization in 13 years. We've had 0 turnover. So that's an indication that people, when we go out and hire people, we get really, really good people coming into the organization. So now, because of kind of what happened, we're hearing some rumor that we got some people that want to leave. So obviously we got to figure out what that is. We have a situation that we got to focus on and work on. So yeah, I think there are things like that. People getting involved in committees, sick time use. I think there's all kinds of little signs and symptoms that indicate the health of the organization if you know what to look for. And then you got to pay attention to them.
I'm shooting questions here, but you talk about, now in that case it's focused on, of course, the inside. We're here for the public, but we're also here for our members. Like it has to be both, right? We can't just be for the public, but like, so how do you balance? Like if you go into the firehouse, a lot of people just want to sit in their recliners and have a pizza and watch TV. That's just the reality of a lot of firefighters. And if you start to muck that up, like you're gonna have people that want to quit, but they want to quit for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, depending on look. They don't like it there anymore, but they don't like it because they have to train or whatever it might be. They think they have a company officer that's it's Hitler because they're running them. Like, how do you find a balance between people? Or maybe different, same question but different answer. How do you build a culture where you actually are for the purpose of the fire service, which is to be prepared? I love how you phrase that, to be prepared, because everyone gives 100% on the call everywhere. There's a very few people who give 100% to prepare for the call. So how do you build a culture where people would like to prepare and don't want to quit because you overwork them or you think that they're not having fun on the job?
I don't think I have a short answer for that, but I have a very good answer, but I'll give you the cliff notes. So yeah, we have something where we talked about committing to a chosen culture, and we call it a high performance learning culture. So over the generations of people leaving and coming in, this preparedness is such a high priority that training is expected. We're a very busy preparedness organization. Training goes on every day. There's a lot of it. Our guys are active, but it's not with busy work. So that's not a factor. I don't think the workload is a condition anymore. And I think that's policed in the firehouses. Guys get their stuff done, and when they're done, it's their time to relax. So that's in our organization. That's not a factor. And the people that we've drawn in over the last few hirings, they're coming in because they want to train and they want to be a part of that. They buy into all the things we're doing. Now, it took some time to transition to that. But, culture is every organization has a culture. It's a matter if you want to take the one that exists or go after a chosen one. But it's simply, defining what you want that culture to value and then living that out. You can't say one thing and act differently. And that's part of that defining success. So if we take the time to really define what we want the culture to value, and then we go out and sell that, and then people one by one start living that, then it kind of takes care of itself. It becomes self-correcting. And so with us, we were able to figure that out. Some of it was by luck. We're a small organization. We got it right. But I would say we're probably a little unique in that area, in that we have people that come to us for that reason, not leaving us because of that, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we attract a certain kind of person.
So do you think you attract that person by what? Oh, to rephrase it. What do you think about growing the hero mentality? Meaning that you come here, you want to be a fire because you want to be a hero, or do you have a problem with the word hero, or do you prefer like to use the word professional or something like that? How do you think about that?
Do you know who Gordon Graham is?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard it? Okay.
The diagram with rare things that happen, with dire fantastic YouTube speech, but I only know him from that 10 minutes when he's an ice scooper.
So you got it. So let's talk about professionalism for just a minute. And he helped me with this, but we're professional, but there's 3 levels of professionalism. And Tony Kearns writes this in his book, Going Pro. A level 1 professional is competent enough to earn a paycheck. We all know that, people, right? Just enough to do the job. A level 2 professional, according to Tony Kearns, is a complier. You put them in a high performance fire company, they're going to be a high performer. You put them in with a bunch of knuckleheads and they're going to. But the highest level of professionalism, if you and I are going to say we're professionals in the fire service, a level 3 professional is somebody who's committed to continual improvement. So that's part of the standard, is that we're going to continually improve. And I don't know if you've seen, but we have a mud flap on the back of our fire trucks that say, "We will come for you." So that's our promise. Now you could say that that's a hero mentality. I don't look at it that. I think it's just fulfilling what our citizens expect, is on your worst day, we're going to come for you, and we're going to be problem solvers. Some of that is going to be in a high risk environment, and we're going to manage that risk. Most of this stuff is not in a high risk, and we're going to solve. But I look at it as professional problem solvers, and that just have to manage risk. I don't like the hero thing. I think that's not even part of the conversation that I have with our organization. It's just being a professional, like a professional football player, soccer player. What does a professional firefighter look like? It's somebody who's committed to solving problems on a professional level and being committed to continual improvement.
So how do you deal with, we have these famous cases about individuals who broke department policy and they were reprimanded even though they did something ultimately good.
Nice.
Right. And there's multiple, things that happen in America that got blown up. As a fire chief, if you have someone who breaks department policy and that time everything turns out great, they save something and everything, how do you handle that?
It's based on their justification, their motivation for doing it, right? If they can come in and justify their actions, and if it's within the parameters of what we're trying to do every day as an organization, our core values, our culture, our mission, then and I'll give you an example. Yeah. The seatbelts. So in most fire departments, there's a rule that says you'll wear your seatbelt. If a fire truck's moving, you're going to wear. Okay, that's a safety thing, right? But if I'm applying risk management, and if I have a firefighter that's out in a big parking lot and he's got to move the fire truck 5 feet and there's no risk around, and that person does it without a seatbelt, well, by the rule, they're in violation of the policy, right?
Yeah.
But from a risk management standpoint, they didn't take on any additional risk. So I think you can translate that to the fireground. You're probably thinking of Danny Dwyer and what he did in Atlanta.
For instance, yeah.
Okay, now in my system, that would not be frowned upon, okay, because of the parameters, and he was going in and trying to save a life. I don't think that's a hero mentality. I think he was delivering exactly what the system promised, but because he broke a written, they painted themselves in a corner. Yeah. They didn't give that person other options. So I think you got to look at it. What was the intention? Was it reckless by nature? Was there just a blatant disregard for best practices? And if we can talk through that and the intention was there, I think we learn from it. We look if we got to modify the procedure or the guideline, and we move on. But we can't have black and white answers for a gray.
I like how you framed that when you said where he was, they painted themselves into a corner by writing the procedures or guidelines that narrow that it didn't allow him to make that decision.
Yeah, right.
And
we can prevent that.
Yeah, by having guidelines that are risk manageable, not risk safety. So I the seatbelts is funny because when I started going to America, I was like, I had the same vision that many Swedish have, the cowboys. And there was like a lot of departments I went to, like you could not move the truck without a seatbelt on. You have to shock the wheels when you stop, like put wheel chocks on them. You could not, you have to have two people when you reverse the fire truck, one on each side every time. And I was going like, you could not run on the fire ground. I had this list of things. You go like, this is insane. Like this is on some level way safer than any Swedish fire department ever been. But then the firefighter runs straight into a flashover. And they go like, they can do that, but they can't go on they have to use wheel chocks on their fire truck. I was like, I could not like get those two images.
Yeah.
That just made no sense.
You define the American Fire Service right there, right? That's how we are.
Yeah. But it was interesting. We can get in. In Sweden, it would be, I think risk management is a very common way of dealing with Swedish problems. Like it's we don't have a black and white rule. I mean, most of our rules we've generically, not the fire service, has gone from descriptive to goal oriented. So most of our legislation for entire society is goal oriented. Like for building, it's a mess. Also, it has its own problems. Like for if you go for like fire safety in the building, a lot of it is going to performance-based standards. So if you find a solution to get around something, you can. Like, we have installed sprinklers, therefore we can build larger fire cells. We put this and this in place, and therefore we think we can manage this and this and this. Now, so it's called like safety trade-offs. So that makes, but it makes it a lot harder because people don't understand what the rules are, because it's sort of arbitrary. Like if you can make if you can justify it, or you think you can justify it, you can build sort of whatever you like. And it makes it harder for the fire service because we don't really know what to expect. Because it's sort of like, okay, this is a wooden-based high-rise, like a high-rise in wood, because it meets the performance criteria. But it's still like, I'm not exactly as sure about being concrete. So it is. But again, it ties back into Swedish. A lot of the regulations we have, taken aside one specific, which is for interior attack, which is very descriptive still. It's very much, we have a lot of Johnnies, and we're not going to allow people to do this. And it's been multiple attempts of changing that, but it's still not we still have that same Johnny document. But otherwise, it's very goal-oriented. It should be like, it should be safe in comparison to that. And then there's a lot of times where you can argue that, well, if you wear a seatbelt during this particular one, it actually makes it more dangerous. I mean, that's an extreme case, but there's a lot of one of those trade-offs where you say, well, you can equally say that if you do this descriptively all the time, you're going to make it unsafe 10% of the times.
Yep. Yeah.
But is it within your powers as a fire chief to change that? Are you very?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's not that OSHA. It's like you have this OSHA and everything. It's more like optional for you.
Well, and I'm in Texas, so we're not an OSHA state. Texas a little more, but no, it's even things like 2 in, 2 out, right? Yeah. that's a federal thing.
Yeah.
And we still have some flexibility with that. But the way I look at it
is it that if it's a known life, you can go in without 2 in, 2 out.
But then you can go in and say every residential structure has that potential, right? Yeah. I mean, you could make that, but I think it kind of goes back to what you were asking about the ranks below me. In my mind, if I can justify it in a court of law, in front of the media, and then that's what I hang my hat on. Now, there are going to be plenty of people disagree, but if I do my homework and I study and I take my responsibility seriously for the men and women of the organization, but for also those that protect, and let that be my guiding factor, I think that keeps you pretty true north and prevents you from drifting towards failure. That's philosophy, my opinion. A lot will disagree with that, but that's how I look at things.
I mean, do you think if you were to put in charge of FDNY tomorrow, like if you just roll your wand, like a massive department, 15,000 employees or whatever they are, do you think your views would change?
No, and I'm a huge fan of FDNY, and I think FDNY gets it right. There's a
I'm
lot
just
of
saying that, not that. I'm just saying, like, do you think it would matter if it's a huge organization?
No. I think it would be easier in a sense. I mean, it'd be harder for change, but if it was a place that was doing good things and it was embedded and there was discipline to that, I think New York is very disciplined to their process, and I agree with that philosophy. So no, it wouldn't change. I don't believe so.
No, but it's because I get the feeling that the more generally in the world, when departments grow, they become more hierarchical, Is that a right word? They become more hierarchical, and they, of course, become more cumbersome to work with, but they also become more bureaucratic in the sense that everything should be controlled down to nuts and bolts. So you leave very little room for individuals to.
I think it's just the opposite.
You think it's the opposite?
I think the smaller organizations have more of that than the big ones. I really do.
Because the chief is in controlling nuts and bolts.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying. So you get a big department, you know, FDNY or Chicago, where they have 40 battalions. You know, all those battalions going to do their own kind of thing, their own way. You got maybe a deputy chief, a division chief, a district chief, battalion chief that are all influencing their principles and their philosophy. So I think it's much greater on the bigger ones than the smaller, for the reason you said, that the chief or the ops chief can be more, have a greater situational awareness of what the organization is doing.
Talk to me about, because it ties into that. Talk to me about when you delegate responsibility. Because my personal opinion, a personal experience of being delegated a responsibility I wasn't really delegated the responsibility. I was a paper product. Because every time I did something, I was second guessed by the fire chief, or every time someone else was second guessing me, they went to the fire chief, and the fire chief didn't say, "Hey, talk to Lars. He's responsible. Don't talk to me." He said, "I'm going to look it up. I'm going to see." Talk to me about delegating responsibility.
So you talked about some of the mistakes that you've made. I'll tell some of mine now. As a young fire chief, I probably was a lot like that. I allowed people probably to skip the chain of command, and I probably didn't trust the people under me to give them a lot. Over time, I've learned and I've matured, and I would say today, my ops chief does his thing. I ask him to just keep me up to date with what's going on, so that if my boss asks me, but he runs his own thing, he makes decisions. My EMS chief, my battalion chief, you know, within the box. I define the box, and as long as you're in the box, then we're okay. But no, I mean, we're going to go through the chain of command, and everybody knows kind of where their level of problem solving is, and so it took a while to get there, though. But I think now everybody understands what they're responsible for. I'm there to support them, give them the tools that they need. And occasionally I have to step in because I understand the bigger picture. I understand the politics of the city. And so sometimes I have to step in and say, well, we can't do that right now. We got to, but otherwise, like my ops chief is building a fire station, and he just comes to me and shows me some stuff and updates me. He's speccing rigs, and he just does it. He just does it. That's his wheelhouse.
Yeah, because so could it be this is my interpretation of a lot of these. The fire chief want to be a good fire chief, and the view of themselves as a good fire chief is an informed fire chief. And to be informed, you need time to put yourself into all the nuts and bolts that happen, and to be informed. And then to be informed, then to make a decision or help a decision or point to a guideline. But when you're supposed to be informed about everything, you don't have time to be informed of that. So you make non-decisions, meaning everything just stays. Nobody gets answers because you're always waiting for the fire chief to say go or no go. Yeah. So it comes from a place of wanting to be good, but not. You want to be good, you want to be informed, you want to make good decisions, but you don't have time to be informed about everything. So instead of being good, you're just the biggest hurdle for getting things done.
I would agree with that. But I would also say there's a trust element. I also think there's fire chiefs who just, because they had a bad experience coming up, or they never really worked in a firehouse, that they just don't trust their people they don't want to give them too much because they don't trust that they're going to produce. And maybe they didn't give them clear expectations. They're bad communicators. That's the whole thing. But I think what you said is absolutely some truth. But the other side is, I think there's fire chiefs who just don't trust their people. So they become micromanagers. And I want to be able to go talk to my citizens and my council and tell them what they can expect from the system. I'm not going to get into the weeds. I mean, I do because I like to. I mean, I like to understand our hose packages and why we're doing what we're doing our engine, just because I'm a nerd in that way. I like to understand, but not to the point where I'm probably going to change that or tell them, you know, I'm learning after the fact, and everybody has a role in doing that. We need to let them people do their jobs. I mean, you know, even in an organization as small as ours.
If you were to restart Colony, like if you build it from the ground up, do you think there would be things you did differently? That if you're not set in whatever wheel tracks there were before you?
You know, this is going to sound arrogant, but up until this little incident we had in March, I would say no. I would say it exceeded my, you know, I said I had this vision, and I would say it exceeded my expectation. So I've been asked that question. What would I do differently? Some of it was luck. I mean, the stars aligned. We had a big building boom, so money became, you know, now some individual situations I would probably handle differently. Maybe some discipline.
I got a sad kid. Wait.
Oh, yo, take care of your kiddo.
Yeah. He had a bad dream.
Who's that? Who do you have there?
Yeah, this is Edwin.
Hey there.
Yeah.
What time is it? What time is it where you are?
Oh, it's 11 o'clock at night.
Oh,
so he was sleeping. He had a bad dream.
Oh no.
So and his mom is sleeping in a different room with our 4-month. So he's alone. Yeah.
You got your hands filled.
Yeah. So I need to quit and go up and go to bed with this guy.
All righty. Well, I enjoyed our time together.
It was good. I have some more questions and thoughts, but it will be good to do a catch up some later when I've pondered some things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thanks. Great to meet you.
Yeah. Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm going to go. Well, that goes.